Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the EcoHitch Class 3 trailer hitch on a 2022 Subaru Impreza. Adding a trailer hitch to any vehicle is really nice because it really opens up what you can do with the vehicle. Now this Impreza is great because it's a hatchback, and this one in particular, they've put a roof rack on it. So they've really opened up the real estate they can use, but having that hitch is really good for when you need to load up your bikes on a bike rack or a cargo carrier, or even if you need to pull a small trailer, you have that ability now having your trailer hitch installed. I'm actually a car enthusiast myself, and I really do like Subarus quite a bit. And something that a lot of people stray against hitches is the fact that sometimes it's a little unsightly. Well, the great thing about this EcoHitch is the fact that the cross tube is actually hidden, and that's because it sits behind the fascia. So really all that's going to be seen is the receiving end here of the hitch. So the rest of it looks nice and OEM clean, and you still have that accessibility to when you want to put your accessories in. It is a 2" by 2" receiver tube opening, which is going to be great for a lot of your different accessories, as a lot of common sizes are going to be that 2". So this is going to really open up to what you can do with it. It also has a nice reinforced collar around it, and that's going to give you added rigidity, and it's just going to make sure that it's nice and strong with your accessories loaded up. Now it is a 5/8 hitch pin hole, and that's going to be great for when you put your accessories in place. You can simply just put your pin and clip in, and then it's going to hold it here. Now it does not include a hitch pin and clip with the hitch, so you may want to pick one up. We have plenty of options here available at eTrailer, including locking ones. That way when you have your accessories loaded up, they're not going to leave in the hands of someone else. Now some of your accessories also, when you purchase them, will come with a pin and clip, so just something to keep in mind when looking at your accessories. It has a plate style safety chain loop here, and I like the fact that it is kind of tucked back. It's still very accessible to be able to put our hooks here, or even a larger clevis style is going to fit with no problems. So attaching, it's really nice, but it's also kind of tucked back a little bit to where it makes it look even a little bit cleaner than some of the other hitches out there. Speaking of clean, the reason this is called an EcoHitch is because it's actually made of recycled aluminum, steel, and stainless steel, and it is actually held to a pretty high standard to make sure that it is just as robust as other hitches, but also the producing of it is a much lower carbon footprint during the process. So it's kind of nice that you're helping the environment by purchasing this rather than another hitch. So we're going to take a few quick measurements here, and we're going to go from the center of the hitch pin hole to the furthest point on the rear fascia. It's going to be right at about 2 inches. And that's an important note for your folding accessories, like some of your cargo carriers or your bike racks that fold up when you're not actually having them loaded up. You want to make sure that they're not going to make any contact with your rear fascia, causing any damage. But this one does look like it does stick out a decent amount, so I don't really foresee any issues, but still something you want to check with your accessories. Now, as far as ground clearance, measuring from the top of the receiver tube opening to the ground, we have 13 inches, which is actually pretty good overall. I really don't worry about this hitch making any contact, but when you load some of your accessories on here that are suspended, like your bike racks or cargo carriers, when the vehicle goes up an incline, those will actually drop down. So it's something to keep in mind when you're actually loaded up with accessories and maybe going up a large hill or doing some off-road excursions. Now, as far as how much can this hitch actually handle, it's a decent amount, being that it is a Class 3. So your gross trailer weight rating is going to be 3,500 pounds, and that's going to be the weight of the trailer plus the accessories loaded up. Now, you also have a tongue weight rating of 525 pounds, and that's just going to be the downward pressure that's put on the receiver tube opening. So more so, you'll reach that limit if you have a heavy cargo carrier and load that up. So 525 is a decent amount, so you should be able to get a lot of your accessories on here. Now, it's important to check your vehicle's owner's manual to see what the vehicle is actually capable of, and compare that with the hitch numbers. Take the lower of the two just to keep you safe. Now, something I will note with those weight ratings, it's not actually able to be used with a weight distribution system, but really this isn't something you'd want to tow something extremely heavy with. But the fact that you do have that 3,500 pounds is going to be great for a little trailer if you're picking up some landscaping or just some small stuff, and this will work just fine. Now, as far as the installation of this hitch goes, this is a little bit more difficult than some of the other ones that you may find. And the reason being is it does have that hidden cross tube, and so it has to live behind the rear fascia. So you are gonna have to remove your taillights. The rear fascia will also pop off. None of it's too terrible to do, and I'm actually gonna walk you through it step by step. So let's go and get this hitch installed. We're going to begin our hitch installation by opening up our hatch to gain access to where our taillights are going to be. These are going to be popping off, and we are also going to be taking our fascia off. So in order to do that, we kind of have to start here, and you're going to see there's going to be these two plastic caps here on our taillights. So with a small flathead screwdriver, there's a nice little slot here. You can kind of just put it in there, and a little twisting motion should pop that open. Now, throughout this whole installation, I do recommend having a nice organized place to keep all of your hardware, as you're going to need a lot of it for reinstallation later. It's just going to make the hitch installation a lot faster. So keep these in a nice spot. And with these opened up, you can see we have two 10mm bolts, so we'll go ahead and get those removed. Now keep in mind, everything that I'm going to be doing on one side of the vehicle, we're going to repeat the same process on the other side, unless I know otherwise. But every time you do a step, just make sure you're doing it on the other side of the vehicle. So with those 10mm bolts out, we're going to need to take our taillight out. Now, sometimes these can be a little bit tricky, as they actually have pins that kind of go into rubber a lot of times, and so it's going to kind of be a little tricky. But the best way I've found is to kind of just wobble it back and forth while kind of pulling the taillight straight out towards you. And then you should be able to get that to pop like that. And that's going to reveal our plug for our taillight. So we're just going to push our tab in here, and we're going to separate this plug. There we are. So now we have this separated. We'll go ahead and set our taillight in a safe spot. So now we're going to work on the inside of the wheel well, and there's going to be some plastic push pins in there, and removing those is going to allow us to get this fascia off to get our hitch in place. So I see right away that we have one kind of tucked in here, and you can see you kind of have your inner fender liner that attaches to this plastic underneath. So there's one, and then there's one set in here a little bit, and then there's also going to be one up top here as well. So they're all a little bit different style. This one is a center punch. You kind of just push the center in, and we should be able to get this to work itself out. Now, with these, you can use a flathead screwdriver to kind of pry them, or this trim panel tool is really helpful in these instances for these plastic push pins. It kind of keeps them from breaking. So we'll go ahead and get these three removed, and then we'll do that on the other side, and we'll get ready to get our fascia off. So if you have a friend close by, you might want to grab them now and set up a nice spot for your fascia to sit on, because once you remove that, it can be a little bit cumbersome, and you want to have a safe place for it to actually be stored while doing the installation. Now, something I'll point out, you'll have this smaller one. This is actually going to be on the outside where the fender or the rear quarter panel meets the rear fascia. Now this one, you simply push the center part in, and then you should be able to pry this out. Where your other two, you're actually going to be prying up here. So just kind of put your flathead or your trim panel tool underneath that, get this to pop up, and these should come out. Now, take your time on them. If they do break, it's very common. You can generally pick up some extra ones at an auto parts store, or we actually sell Performance Tools ones to replace them. But if you just take your time, you should be able to get these out with no problem. Once you have your push pins on your wheel well taken off, you're also going to see that you'll have three of them right here. So we're going to pop this off. Same thing, just kind of using your flathead screwdriver. You may need to work these out. This is where that trim panel tool really comes in handy to pry these off. There's one. So once you get these three actually removed, there's going to be two more that hold it onto the chassis, but this is going to stay here, but this will allow that fascia to actually come off. So make sure you get those three popped off. A little helpful tip here, we're going to be removing the fascia, but before we do that, I actually would like to put a little bit of painter's tape along the seam where the rear fascia meets the rear quarter panel. The reason being is once you pop this off, when you go to put it back on, the bumper can kind of flop around a little bit, and getting it to line up properly can be kind of tricky. All the while, those plastic tabs can actually cause little scuffs or even chips on your paint. So just to kind of prevent that, putting a little bit of painter's tape along both edges here is going to make sure that you have that kind of buffer, a little protection. That way you're not going to scratch your paint. It's just one of those steps, pretty quick and easy to do, and it's going to save you from a headache of having a scratch on your car. With your extra set of hands, we're ready to get this fascia removed. So the way you're going to want to do that is simply start by prying on this outside edge, working your way towards the middle. And you're going to see slowly the clips are going to pop. And when you get to this section, it can be a little bit tricky to get these over. Sometimes it helps to lift on the bottom of the fascia, and that's going to allow you to kind of slide them over. Another option too is you can actually take a small flathead and kind of push that tab down on the black plastic, allowing it to kind of unlatch from there. So we'll go ahead and do that, kind of just working our way towards the center on both sides, and we should be able to get this popped off here pretty easily. So if these tabs are giving you a little trouble here, you can just simply kind of push these down and work your bumper over it. You can actually kind of pry on this portion as well, just to kind of get it over that black plastic. Now, I will say underneath the vehicle, there's going to be some plastic underguards, and you can remove them if you want. The instruction manual doesn't actually say that you need to, but I think once we get this all popped off, we'll be able to kind of drop it over it. So again, just take your time on these clips. You don't want these to snap, as they're not going to really hold your fascia on as well as it was before. So again, just kind of lifting on the underside here. That's going to allow me to get these to pop off. You're also going to have this larger clip here. So again, just kind of take your time on that. You can actually pry that tab up a little bit there. This one was pretty fragile, so be careful with that. And then as we kind of work our way towards the middle here, there's also going to be some clips, and we should be able to get our fascia off. Now, it might get caught on some of the underbody paneling, so just kind of be patient with that. And then, looks as if we have two supports here. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that we pop off the plastic panels on those, but for now we have the rest of the fascia off, so that's a good start. Since we found those plastic push pins after taking the fascia off, just make sure you get those knocked out, and then you'll simply take your fascia and set it aside, nice and safe on. We're just using cardboard here. Just make sure you have a nice spot, that way if it does fall over, it's not going to scratch it. So now we're going to remove the bumper impact bar, and there are going to be 3 bolts on each side, and they're going to be a 14mm socket. So you're going to want an extension here, or you could potentially get them with a wrench, but this is going to be a lot easier with an extension because there's actual 3 straight shots to really get to these. You have one, there's another one that's right here, so as you feed that through, that should get there. There's also one here on the notch. Now, I'm not sure if there is a tab that holds this in place. So what I generally do is I'll take out 2 of them, and then the last one I'll leave just with a few threads left. That way it's not going to fall off while I'm working on the other side. So just a little helpful tip there. So let's go ahead and we'll get these removed. So a few threads left on that last stud. We're going to go ahead and we'll get the other side removed. So with the hardware removed, it is kind of hanging in place here, but just on the studs. So you're going to want to remove this, and we're going to go ahead and set this aside for now. Next, we're going to need to remove our bumper supports here. There's going to be one on each side, so just push pin here, and then those will slide out. So go ahead and get both of those removed. So now we're going to need to lower down our muffler, and in order to do that, we're also going to want to make sure that we support it before we take off our rubber isolators, and that way this isn't going to be hanging down unsupported and causing damage to the exhaust further down the way. So if you're doing this in your driveway or in your garage, putting a block of wood or something underneath this to support it is going to be really nice, but you're going to want to make sure you have something small enough to where you still have a little bit of ability for this to drop down. So Just a small block. That way it's not fully supported by itself. The way that I'm going to do it is a cam buckle strap, and I'm just going to kind of hook onto our suspension here just on the cross member and create a little cradle for it, and then I can tighten this up. Now, to get your isolators off, a quick tip is going to be using some penetrating oil. Just kind of spray them down where they sit in the rubber, and this kind of helps lube it up and be able to pop these off a lot easier. You won't have to fight with them as much. Now, there's a total of 4 of them that we're going to be doing. You'll see the first 2 pretty easily here. On the driver's side, there's going to be 1 more a little bit further back, so we'll get that one there. And then also, you're going to see there's going to be the one here that's going off of our cross member. So go ahead and spray that down as well. And then using a pry bar or a long flathead screwdriver, we're going to go ahead and just pry these off. So try to find a nice leverage spot to be able to push these. And sometimes these can be a little bit frustrating, so just take your time here. And it doesn't matter if you do the top or bottom, whichever comes off easier, it'll all kind of go back the same. So for a little leverage purposes, I think this top one's going to be a little easier for us. But you can see already the muffler started to drop down, and this will be here to cradle it once it drops down further. So go ahead and get all 4 of these removed. So with our muffler drop down out of the way, you're going to see on our frame rail where our bolts are actually going to feed through in order for our hitch to mount up. Now you're going to see that there's 3 rubber plugs. We're going to be removing the furthest ones out. You're going to have those on both sides of the car, so you can use a fingernail honestly to pry these out pretty easily, or a flathead will work all the same. So just go ahead, you can get those taken out. Go ahead and do that on the other side, and then we'll meet back here. So now you're going to want to grab a bolt, an internal tooth washer, your plate washer here, as well as your fish wire. Now what this is going to do is allow us to get our bolt and our washers in place here, and that's going to be the stud where the hitch actually lines up to. This one's going to be pretty easy because as we look in where our bumper support was, we'll be able to feed that one in. But for these back ones, it's going to get a little bit tricky, and that's where this fish wire comes into play. Now, don't worry, this is actually pretty straightforward. I'm just going to show you how to do it, and it's going to seem a lot less confusing. So take the coiled end, and you're going to put it in the farthest hole, and then feed that up here. And then what we're going to do is put our plate washer here first through there, and then we'll take our internal tooth one, and we're going to slide that over that, and then we're just going to take our bolt and then feed it onto the coil, just threading it on. And then what we'll do is grab the wire from the back side, and then as we kind of jostle it along, that bolt's going to go through both of those washers. Now, I am going to remove our fish wire here because they only included 1 in the kit, and we'll be needing to do this on the other hole on the driver's side. So go ahead, thread this off. Now it is important when we put the hitch in place, if you push this back up in the frame rail, you're going to have to kind of fish it out. But luckily it's a pretty open shot here, so if you have a magnet, you should be able to get it. Other cars are not so friendly as that sometimes, but we are going to be reusing this here. So with that one fish wired in place, we're going to do the same bolt, plate washer and internal washer combo, and we'll just drop it in place here, and then we'll repeat on the other side. So once we have all 4 of our studs in, we'll come back and get ready to put our hitch on. Now something else I noticed, this rubber plug here really isn't going to be in the way too much, but as our hitch actually sits flush against here, it's going to maybe cause it not to tighten up all the way. So we can go ahead and remove these as well. So now grab an extra set of hands, and we're actually going to put the hitch up in place. Now you're going to want to grab 2 flat washers, a split washer, and then a nut, and that's going to go on each stud. So the trick here is to have set actually ready. That way when you put it up in place, you can at least finger tight it on each side, and that'll hold the hitch in place, allowing it to be a lot easier to get the other ones on there. So take your time to make sure that those studs actually fit through the holes. Again, you don't want to push it up in the frame rail, so just kind of take your time. And then once you have those fed through, go ahead, put your 2 flat washers up. And it might help to do these front ones first, just because you can kind of push that bolt down, and then you're going to follow that up with your split washer, and then take your nut and just get that hand tightened on. Now, if it is kind of cumbersome with that hardware and those washers kind of moving around, something else you can do is just take the nut and hand tighten that on there. And that's going to just hold that up for you, and that way you can actually work on the other ones while it's supported. So if that works better for you, by all means, that's a great way to do it. Just make sure you go back and put that hardware on once you actually have the other ones in place. So now you can go ahead and make sure that all your hardware is put in with this fashion of washers and hand tightened up. We're going to be tightening these down. We don't have to get too crazy here, because we're going to go back with the torque wrench to make sure they're at the proper setting. But in order to get these tight, sometimes they can be tricky as it kind of spins around at the top there. So if you're struggling with that, no big deal, because this is nice and open. We can take a 19 millimeter wrench here, and we're just going to kind of hold this in place while we tighten it from underneath. And that should get it nice and snug. So go ahead and do that for all 4. We're going to go back with a 19 deep well, and we're going to torque these down to the manufacturer's recommendations in the instruction manual. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, we have these here at eTrailer, where generally you can rent them at an auto parts store. But this is an important step, because it's going to make sure that it's not too tight, causing stress on the threads, but also it's not going to be too loose and come loose over time while you're using your hitch. So make sure you are doing this step. And we'll just go through and make sure that they're all properly torqued. So now those bumper support brackets that we took off earlier, we'll go ahead and these just kind of go in this slot here, and then that should align where our plastic push pin goes in. So now you can go ahead and get your impact bar that we took off previous, and we can just go ahead and slide this in place, and those studs should kind of hold it there. And then we can take our hardware that we had taken off previous and get this in place and tighten down. We'll be able to tighten them all back up just the way that we took them off. Now, on the driver's side though, this is offset, so this lower bolt that we put in place, it's going to be pretty tricky to get to because the hitch is now there. So I recommend just a ratcheting 14 millimeter wrench, and you can kind of access that pretty easy from the side. So you may have to do that rather than using the socket that you previously used to remove it. We are going to need to do a little bit of trimming on the fascia before we put it back, and that's just going to allow for clearance of the hitch here. And for the 2022, the newer models, they will be a little easy square here. It's just 2.5 by 2.5. So go ahead and measure that out. I use painter's tape just to kind of give me a nice visual. You can use a paint marker. However you want to do it, it's up to you. Now, as far as cutting it, you also have a few options. You can use a pair of tin snips, and it should cut through the plastic pretty well here. Or my preferred method is using a Dremel here, and that's going to get you some nice clean cuts. It's going to be a little bit easier in those corners. And then we'll go back with the file, clean it all up, and then we'll get our fascia mounted back up. Now, if you are using a rotary tool like a Dremel, just be careful. This plastic can get kind of hot, but once it cools down, we'll go back, take our file here, and we'll just clear some of that flashing away. So now we can actually go ahead and get our fascia here, and we're just going to kind of slide that over the hitch first. And if you need that extra set of hands, by all means, that tape's definitely going to help give us a little more protection. But once we get the center portion aligned, you can actually see the clips where it slides into. You're gonna want to just make sure it's nice and even across the board. And then once in place, we can go ahead and push this in, get it nice and snapped in place. So with the fascia back on, we can go ahead and get all of our plastic push panels, push buttons back in on all of our panels. We can raise up the exhaust, get our taillights back on, and then we're just about ready to use our hitch. That's gonna do it for the hitch install. So overall, not too terribly bad to do, and we have our hitch installed, so all that's left to do is hook up our accessories or our ball mount and start using the hitch.